Ex-prisoners of Reddit, what was the worst thing you saw inside the prison walls? I worked in the medical department of a large prison in Florida. We had an inmate bite a bigger inmate's nose off, the tip. The bigger guy kept asking the kid for sex and the kid had enough. We saw several stabbings, several were life-flighted out, but those weren't the most interesting. We had an inmate smoke some bad spice, made out of God knows what. He came to medical out of his mind and later died because it caused brain hemorrhaging. One guy got a dislocated patella and was just sitting patiently as I got his info. I asked if it hurt and he said yeah. I asked how he was so chill and he replied, because I'm not a bitch.
English female prison. I saw a woman get held down by two others while a third woman proceeded to shove her hand up the woman's vagina to check if she had came in with a parcel, drugs. This was in the communal showers, so yeah, addicts don't give a fuck.
Saw someone break a small branch off a tree in the yard, dry it out in the sun, sharpen it down to a point on the concrete and then stab a guy in the back with it 4 times. He had to be airlifted to hospital because it punctured his lung. I spent 8 years in prison, in the state of Georgia. There was a guy who made a hustle of holding or hiding illegal cell phones for the Mexican gangs. When a shakedown or search occurred, this man was responsible for the loss of many of those cell phones. He was confronted on the yard, and tried to escape by climbing the fence. He got stuck in the razor wire, shredding his forearms, while 7 or 8 Mexican gang members were stabbing him all in the back of his legs and his ass. Done 11 years myself. One of the worst things I've seen is 2 members of a gang called Goodfellas, aka 40 Deep, jumped on a blood on the way back from Pill Call. One used a large knife, the other had a fan motor in a net bag and used that as a flail. Also seen, heard multiple people being raped. A friend of mine admitted to me after a year or so that he had been actively raped every night by his roommate, an OG from the Bloods, for about a 5-month period. There's more, just what I could think of at the moment. I made a friend early on who was sentenced to life for killing a man that had touched his niece. He'd been locked up for about 5 or 6 years when I'd first met him. Talked to him every day for 3 years and one day he comes up to me and says he needs to talk to me about something. We do a lap on the back 40 and he tells me his old lady is leaving him, and isn't bringing his daughter up to come see him anymore. He's actually crying. I didn't know what I could do to help him, so I let him cry and told him to not let it bother him, maybe she'll come around. We go on about our day, and everything seems normal. That night he woke me up. He bunked across the hall, crying. I got up to talk to him and he says he wants to die, and that he's glad I'm up because he doesn't want to be alone. I start hitting the panic button for my cell and screaming for a guard, but no one comes, and I have to watch while he pries his mirror off of his wall. He put on his linens and blanket like a big robe and he cuts his stomach with his mirror. It was hard to see much because of the blankets and the dark, but I could smell his blood. Then he lit his blankets on fire. The COs got there when the smoke alarm went off, but they were too late. I still have nightmares about it, screaming for him to stop, to just talk it out, but he never does. I've seen a lot of fucked up shit, man, but this was probably the worst. Or, at least, it stuck with me the longest.
Not prison but jail. 6 months pregnant and her water broke. COs didn't believe her and waited to take her to the hospital until she was hemorrhaging. The baby died and the woman was released because they didn't want to pay medical costs. This was 2004-ish.
Was in the TV room during late night in a dorm unit pretty early on in my 10-year bid. There were only a few guys in there since it was about to close, and I was towards the back of the room. A guy walked in with a coffee cup, sit down at a chair a couple rows in front of me, then leaves the room again. There was an older white guy sitting in the seat directly in front of the coffee chair. Couple minutes later, the man who left the coffee comes back in through the back door of the TV room, walks right past me with a huge piece of metal. It looks like a giant tin can top. He walked right to the chair behind the older white guy and brought the metal around to the front of his neck and started fucking sawing this dude's head off a few feet away from me. I was stunned and watched for a while, but I eventually got up and walked out the back door, being careful not to make furtive movements to tip off the CO at the desk. The next morning, I learned that the older guy was a child molester and had been nearly decapitated. The giant piece of metal was the entire top of a toilet sink console that had been removed, flattened, and sharpened. Was definitely among the craziest incidents of violence I saw in there. There was talk about a guy assaulting his own daughter. Some guys made him a cup of morning coffee. Morning coffee is basically taking a kettle, pour cooking oil in it, heat it up and add a lot of sugar and then throw it in someone's face. It was very uncomfortable to see and hear. I spent 6 years in prison. 1 month and I watched a Crip-on-Crip gang stabbing. They stabbed the guy 60+ times while he was curled up in a ball screaming help, but nobody could because he'd be a target next. He somehow survived, but I couldn't tell you how. I think about it every day. Not the most messed up, but this stuck with me for whatever reason. While studying medicine, I was working at a prison clinic in NY. Guy comes in with a fairly dirty cast on his arm. Otherwise he seems fairly normal. He's there to have his cast removed. So I ask him when they put the cast on. He says December. It's late January, so yeah, it's been enough time for the bone to heal. I figured his living conditions were the reason for the cast looking like that, so I got the okay and started removing the cast. The smell. His skin underneath looked terrible, and there were little pieces of wood and other crap embedded in the skin. Complete atrophy of the casted forearm. After further questioning, it turns out the cast had been on his arm for over a year, and it was just getting removed. I was glad to be getting out of that rotation. Thanks for watching. Best of Reddit.